Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to an instant reaction edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me after a pretty excitable day out at CommBank Stadium is my good mate, Sixties. Big fella, it was hot, it was sunny, it was glorious. We had a big day, including our first live show from the Parramatta Eels Club, now in Stirlos. How you pulled up after all of the action?
Yes, well, this is our second instant reaction podcast of the evening. It was a little bit of the ambient noise.
It was a bit rowdy in Stirlos, wasn't it?
Very rowdy in Stirlos. So thank you to the people who fronted up and came and said g'day or just listened to the podcast there with special guest Steve Ella. But we've decided that we would record this second instant reaction from home because it just gives us a bit of time to get our headspace around the game and maybe to give you a little bit of better quality audio to listen to. So, mate, a long day, mate. Starting early with junior reps over at Granville at just after 9 o'clock this morning, and then finishing up with the post-match appearance in the Leagues Club.
Yes.
Really, really long day. And as you said, quite hot over there at the stadium. We tried to seek refuge in the shade on the
Western stand,
western side of the field during the New South Wales Cup, but the heat still caught us during the first grade. So
the intermission between Cup and first grade in that first half was absolutely brutal on the eastern side. But before we get any further, big fella, as always, a quick shout out to the sponsors of the show: Big Swing Golf, North Mead, and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan, and Parramatta. Not to mention Parramatta Eels Club, home of the mighty Parramatta Eels. Thanks to everyone involved in getting Tip Sheet out each and every episode. Alrighty, let's start with the NRL. We've got a few other games we can talk about after the 60s, but obviously the main event was the round one home opener for the mighty Parramatta Eels, hosting a Western Sydney rival in the Canterbury Bulldogs. A lot of chatter in this game, or coming into this game, about how competitive the Dogs are going to be with all the spending they've done. And I think suffice to say the Eels handled them pretty comfortably. I'm not sure we really saw the Eels in full gear at any point in this victory, which was 26-8. With the Eels scoring via Morgan Harper, a double to Bryce Cartwright, who was sensational, and Bailey Simonson bagging a run against the play try in the 76th minute, and we had a mixed bag of kicking duties. Mitchell Moses took the first conversion, but then surrendered the duties to Quinton Gufferson, who continued a flawless streak for the Eels there, 4 from 4 combined, with Mitch dealing what we suspect to be was a groin issue throughout this game. In terms of the stats, 60s, Eels dominated possession, 59% in their favour, as you imagine, time of possession equally on their side, plus 10 minutes thereabouts. Despite some late errors, and we'll talk about those, sort of opening the door for the Dogs to get some points on the board, the Eels still completed at an outstanding 89%, 41 of 46 sets, and as you'd imagine, dominating all the key attacking stats as a result. Runs, run meters, post-contact meters, all vastly favouring the Eels. Line breaks were still only 4-3. Tackle breaks 29-23 in favour of the Parramatta Eels. But the average set distance was actually closer than I thought. I thought I saw another stat somewhere else saying the Eels were pretty handily ahead there, but there you go. Eels actually ahead on the play the ball speed, 3.42 to 3.56. You don't see that too often. As you'd imagine, given our proclivity to offloading 60s, it's in our favour, 16-3, massively outstripping the Dogs in that regard. Kicks and kick defusals, both teams fairly close there, 71% for the Eels, 62% for the Dogs. Defensively, Eels over a 90% effective tackle rate, which is good to see, 90.75. Canterbury not too shabby, 88% for them. Eels only missing 23 tackles. There was the one intercept at the end of the game for Sean Russell, and only 4 ineffective tackles as well, so good to see there. And then in terms of the discipline, only 4 errors for Parramatta, 7 penalties conceded apiece, but the Dogs did have 3 ruck infringements to go alongside that. Although there were a couple of 6 against now I think about it, but they sort of came to the game later. Both teams ended up for player on report. I think that was Bryce Cartwright for the Eels, and I'm not sure if he has a case to answer for that. I remember seeing the replay and thinking that was just a good hard hit. So have to wait and see. But that's the tail of the tape there, 60s. Obviously, there's some individual players we can talk about statistically. But I think the Eels, maybe they got the third gear at one point here, but they put the Dogs in a muzzle and really didn't let them play any football today.
It was no surprise the sort of football that was played today. We talked about it in the preview podcast. The Eels, when you've got a pack that they boast, you're going to be getting that, well, as BA loves to talk about, the winning the collision. And we talked about how that is, it's rugby league. You've got to win the middle. And Parramatta set about making it a total domination through the centre of the field and really built up defensive pressure on the Bulldogs. And it was a grinding victory, wasn't it? It was reminiscent of the type of football that Melbourne used to like to play when they were really dominating the NRL, just not giving teams a look in, not necessarily doing anything explosive. If you've got a small collection of players who can play off that sort of platform, and the Eels have got it with the halves and Clint Gutherson, but yeah, it was apart from that late rally that the Bulldogs were able to,
which was a sequence of unforced errors from Will Penasini and Jermaine Hopgood.
That's it. Apart from that, that was really the only, I guess, the only time in the game when the Eels paid the price for a couple of errors. You mentioned about the completion rate, which was outstanding. So for Para basically to go back to back with errors in sets, I guess it should reinforce to the team that you're only as good as maybe your last completed set.
Mm-hmm.
Or rather, you're an incompletion away from undoing a lot of good that you've done during the game. So I guess errors will happen in every game because the teams aren't perfect. And I think the attitude of coaches towards that is, if you chance your hand at something, and I know this wasn't errors made by chancing in the hand, it was straight out drops of the footy. But if you make an error, all they ask for is to defend it.
And to be fair, the first try they scored, the Canterbury in them, I thought that was where I was getting stripped short. But the second one was a reminder that Viliama Kikau is indeed one of the best back rowers in the competition. Mitchell Moses and Will Penasini made a good tackle on him, and he still managed to fire a cutout pass as he was falling to the ground to find Stephen Crichton. So he is a very, very good player, just mired in a not-so-good team, I think. But for the Eels 60s, we made a lot of time was spent this week talking about the importance of making a strong start. We learned our lessons last year. We're talking about the hope that we learned our lessons last year when we slipped to a Golden Point defeat against the Melbourne Storm. And obviously the two losses that followed that, and how much of a hole you find yourself in. I think this is a pretty solid evidence to suggest that the Eels are approaching the start of the competition in a really good mindset, even with some of the setbacks on the field we saw today. Mitchell Moses being hampered by what we suspect is a groin injury. We saw some players unavailable in round one already in Mike Acevo and Wirren McGregor. Despite that, and despite some of the background noise that happens around that, they sort of hit the ground running. Really positive stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it had to be, because next round is the Panthers. Now, it's not to say that the Eels won't be confident of being able to take the Panthers. However, despite Parramatta's brilliant record during regular round games against the Panthers, you still don't want to go into round two of a premiership taking on Penrith at home after a first-round loss.
First-round loss, it's their home opener for the season. Like, it doesn't get much more difficult in terms of the handicap for a visiting team. So, yeah, the Eels definitely are going to have the deck stacked against them in that regard, even though we do know that they play their best football against the Panthers and they're going to give it everything next week. But, yeah, that's why this week was so important. Get your 2 points, get some positive for and against, start building on the field, And, you know, I think even considering the conditions, it might have been a benefit in the long term to play on a hot Saturday, you know, sort of iron out some of those kinks and get the cramps sort of out of the way and the lactic acid flowing now so that you can be better next week. But yeah, I got to say I was pretty happy with the team effort. We showed some good shapes. We played some really good attacking football. I think in terms of sequences, the second Bryce Cartwright try, I think it was outstanding. The Ryan Madison short ball off Junior Paulo into a roll-around flick to Bryce Cartwright. I thought that's an adaptation of a play we've used for a few different players across the last few seasons, and seeing our forwards linking up like that was one of my big talking points in the Gold Coast Titans trial, was working in pods of those forwards, and we're seeing it. Like, we're really seeing it, and it's going to be very difficult to, you know, teams can stop it once, twice, 3 times, but that's a sort of hammer blow that is so hard when you can keep throwing it at an opponent, and it's really good to see the Eels executing that in round 1.
I mean, we knew what the forwards were we knew they were going to feature strongly in this game. Did they produce the way you wanted them to in round 140?
It's funny because you look at the stats, and despite our dominance in possession and you know, even reflected on the scoreboard too, we had a very healthy win. If you looked at the numbers purely from the forwards, Junior stands out. 19 carries, 163 metres, 62 of those being post-contact. But after that, Reg 118 metres, Lane 116, Bryce Cartwright 114, and then Hopgood tick under 199, Madison 105, Ofengahi 90, and Tuolungi 53. That doesn't look like a dominant pack, does it? But what we saw on the field was, I'm not really sure what the meters are in the sort of post stats here, but they were very good, very, very good. We saw Junior sliding back to the bench before kickoff, which was something that we saw in the Gold Coast Titans trial, and something we spoke about as a result strategically, what they can bring to the team. I thought he really flourished in that role. He came on and really went hammer and tongs against the Dogs. They really struggled to contain him. He's been marked down for just 3 tackle breaks, but he was an absolute load out there. They were struggling to bring him down.
And can I just also point out too, in those running meters that Junior made, to counter that and to maybe talk to the positivity of coming off the bench, he was only required to make 12 tackles.
Yes, that is a perfect game script for Junior. It's not like Junior can't make tackles. We know he's actually a pretty solid defender, but the more tackles he makes, the more it bluntens his ability with the ball in hand. And if you can keep him as a fresh on one side of the ball compared to the other, you get to utilise his unique characteristics that make him so difficult. And the Bulldogs really struggled for an answer for Junior today. He was able to offload, he was able to bump tackles and create those not just second phase opportunities, but the ability to disrupt the defensive line. So he was very good. And in saying that,
I was just going to say, and just to provide a point of comparison, he played very similar minutes to Reg, and I had Reg featuring highly in my best on field. Reg played 49 minutes, Junior 45 minutes. Reg with his 118 run meters to Junior's 163. So significantly more run meters there for Junior. But I mentioned about how little defence Junior was required to make in his minutes on the field. In contrast to Junior's 12 tackles, Reg had to make 27 tackles. And in that he missed 4 tackles in those stats there. But yeah, it that made it interesting. And then I know people have been critical of BA's rotation in the forwards, and that Reg and Junior were the belief being that they were asked to spend too much time on the field. Well, tonight, where we had that 49 and 45 minutes, the others in the rotation off the bench, you had Ryan Madison playing for 33 minutes, Joe Offengawi 32 minutes, and Kelma Tuolungi 48 minutes. So those numbers off the bench were, I guess it was a little bit more of an even spread of how long they were required out on the field. Maybe that keeps a few supporters who are critical of BA's rotation a little bit quieter. I just think, for mine, BA just plays. I don't know if he has a set idea about how many minutes each player is going to play. I tend to think that he might have a ballpark figure, but I think he's very much a play by the game and make the changes as he sees it as the game unfolds. So,
and sort of following on to that, we talked about it earlier this year, but I do think this is the best bench the Eels have assembled in Brad Arthur's time at the club. You know, we've had some good benches. This one has the potential to be maybe the best in the NRL. There was no Woody this week, no Widderimu Greg, but you know, you factor him into that rotation, and plus, you know, some people that might end up emerging from the New South Wales Cup, and there's some seriously handy players that are going to be missing out in the coming weeks.
So was your thought then that the bench, the minutes played by the bench, is reflective of the quality of the bench?
I think in seasons prior, there was definitely an argument there. And, you know, I have been critical of Brad's rotations at times. I feel like there have been maybe in certain matchups ways he could have approached it differently. But that comes with the caveat, like I said, that in that time, Reg and Junior were so far clear-cut our best middle forwards that you had to lean on them significantly. And now we come into a team where we're talking next week, with assuming that Woody comes back from that hamstring strain per the club's injury report, that there is going to be a very good player missing out one way or the other. And on top of that, Junior and Reg are down below 50 minutes in their stints, and that's because you have guys like Ryan Madison, Joe Ofengahi, and Kel Matualangi that you need to ration out minutes to. So it's a very good problem to have. I thought Brad handled the rotations pretty well today. The only concern that you might have leveled at Brad in these rotations was the whole health issue of Mitchell Moses, but it turns out that he was able to not only play through that, but it's not really a concern moving forward. So you didn't need to bring Brendan Hands in to the halves. And indeed, Mitchell Moses ended up being sort of back to his usual self in the back end of that game with his kicking game. There was a couple of absolute dimes he planted from his own half, dropping about 3 metres off the Canterbury goal line. So that was good to see. Yeah, so I like the bench rotation, I like the bench composition. I'm not sure what that means for next week because it's going to be a doozy. But yeah, talking about the forward pack 60s, and we continue to talk this guy up for good reason, but geez, Bryce Cartwright he's on an absolute tear going back to last year into this season. And again, you look at the numbers, 18 carries, 114 metres. Obviously, it's involvement and there's some production there, but it really doesn't tell a story as to the impact he is having in these games. His offload selection is vastly improved. It was never a question about his ability to get the ball out, but that selective ability to make a good offload. He's making great offloads. He's running great lines. He is setting the tone defensively with line speed and aggression. Got put on report for what I thought was just a good hit today. We'll have to wait and see if there's anything to come from that. But yeah, this chapter of his career, it is really the realization of his talents. And he won't, this is me getting the crystal ball out, he's not going to feature in State of Origin selections this year. He didn't last year. But for mine, he is absolutely a representative caliber back row.
Yeah, and I think that's a fortunate place for the Eels to be in, because if you've got someone who is playing that calibre of football, but they're not going to come into calculations for representative selection, it's almost as good as having, say, a star Kiwi.
Yeah, that's a good
player.
shout, isn't it? It's like having that really high-level rep player that's just never going to feature in rep talks at the wrong time of the year. So
that's right.
He was sensational today. Like I said, it's on both sides of the ball. He's not just a flashy attacker. He does the hard work, rucking it out. And you see Reg looking for the big hits, and you see some other guys looking for, the opportunistic big shots. But it feels like Bryce has been the one the most successfully pulled them off in the last 6 months of football, not the off-season included.
Yeah. We talked about it tonight with Steve Ella, and it's like his first year at the Eels, Bryce was really in that process of finding a new home. And it was all about, I guess, feeling like he belonged at Parramatta and getting through that sort of process. And we saw splashes of who he could be in that first season. Get to last season, and what you had was that consolidation of consistent football. So he played a very, there was the gap between his best and worst really minimised during the season last year. And that was a criticism that was levelled probably rightly at Bryce during his time at the Titans. And what we've seen just in this first game in this season is that he may have taken himself to a level where he is the match winner, the difference maker out on the field. And I think Steve Ellis said words to that effect, didn't he?
Yes.
In describing who Bryce Cartwright, the player, is these days. Now, this isn't a matter of getting carried away with what Bryce Cartwright can deliver, because I think most rugby league fans know that at his best, he's going to create tries out of nothing. That's just who he is. He's got this freakish ability. But it came down to when he'd choose to unleash something, and if more often than not in the past, especially at the Titans, it would be at the wrong time. There were question marks about his defence or commitment to defence. There's none of those question marks now. None of them whatsoever. Without question, the Eels and Brad Arthur have been very, very good for Bryce Cartwright and turning his career around. And I said it at the time when the Eels signed Cartwright that I was really excited by the signing, because I was convinced that Brad would be able to unlock the best of Bryce Cartwright. He was, you spoke about his origin potential down the track, 40, and the fact that he just, even if he was playing origin level football in terms of the week-to-week stuff, with the Eels, he was unlikely to be rewarded with any representative jumper this year. But I think he's got himself back to that level that he had when he was with the Panthers, and he was on the cusp of origin selection. That's how strongly
he is. The Eels have an absolutely stacked back row, and I think it's fair to say that he's probably locked himself in as the top dog there, which is a big statement considering that Sean Lane has been, a force in the NRL since 2019 when he joined the Eels and has been killing it, while Jermaine Hopgood has, established himself in the last 12 months as a outstanding young talent too. But Bryce just, I really have to tip my hat to him. He is completely bought into what Brad Arthur wants, and as a result, we're seeing the best of him. Another player that looks to have bought in Sixties. I will put my hand up against Sixties because I was a little bit down on the signing at the time, but throughout the preseason, into the trials, and now into round one, Morgan Harper has had a really nice run, and he posted a good try off that Dylan Brown kick today. But 13 carries, 124 metres, some good defence, and some good tough football. He and Sean Russell, I think, led the way with the tough carries coming out of our red zone and out of our own half. And I thought he looked really good today, so well done to Morgan.
You know the reports I was giving you about how Morgan Harper looked to me during the pre-season, and I was convinced that he edged ahead of Bailey Simonson in the battle for centre spot. Bailey got a bit of a jump when 2024 came around, the return to training, in early January. Morgan had a couple of weeks out doing a little bit of rehab, and that happens with players from time to time during the pre-season. Anyone that hasn't watched pre-season training, you will see players in and out of rehab at different times. And it might be, they might be in there for a couple of days, they might be in there for a week or two, depending what the issue is, but they've got no need to rush any players. If someone's got a little bit of a niggle, well, they get it right, because they want as many there as they can for the start of the season. So they're not going to make players train through a simple problem that's easy solved with a short stint in rehab. So, Morgan had a little stint at the start of 2024, which meant Bailey got a bit of a jump on him. And I think what we saw tonight is what we were talking about before in terms of the role that Morgan can play for Parramatta this year. we miss having a Tom Opachik type centre, don't we? Someone who was just the total professional that knows, that's just ultra consistent in how they play, gets the job done that they need to get done. And that's really Morgan Harper to a T. So we saw today, he got that one opportunity for a try, and that was a tougher grounding than people might realise to get that ball down as quickly, and he made it look easy.
Yeah,
And,
he did that. He handled that entire thing, that sequence perfectly. And yeah, I loved his willingness to put the hand up for the tough meters. Our back three weren't Penrith, like the Penrith trio by any means, but they rolled their sleeves up. I thought Sean Russell, he only had 84 meters, but been a bit hard done by there. I thought he had some really fearless carries running into the teeth of the Canterbury defence. So good to see the entire backline contributing in that regard. It'd be remiss of me not to give a quick shout out to Joey Lussick, 60s, for one of the biggest 40-20s you're going to see all season. That was close to a 30-20. He absolutely rifled that one out. That was a hell of a kick. But I got one complaint about this game, and it's not about the two errors that led to the two Canterbury tries, 60s. It was that, unfortunately, the bunker rightly interfered in what would have been one of the most comical tries we would have seen all year happening in round one off the Bailey Simonson grubber kick. That we saw the Eels sort of go to the short side from Dillon to Bailey, have that grubber kick where Bailey led the charge. The ball bounces up absurdly at the last second and looks like it goes back into the field of play, but end up touching a dog who was out. From there, the Dogs recovered. One-on-one strip from Bryce Cartwright after the Eels fell off that led to Sean Russell scoring in the corner. It would have been one of the most difficult tries to compete with for the degree of difficulty, the comical nature of it, and just even the excitement around the stadium. So the fact that the bunker had to take that off us, I'm upset, big fella.
Yeah, I guess the positive to come out of it was the very next set of six that Cardi got over.
That beautiful
his second try. So it was good in that regard. It was spectacular, but we always knew when the try was awarded that it was going to come back and have a look at that.
A very deep look at that whole sequence at the dead ball line, exactly. And unfortunately, they did the right thing. They had to take it off us. But I'm still upset.
And of course, in that instance, we were talking about it at the ground. Do you take the tackle? Like, if you've got suspicion yourself, do you just take the tackle so it's play on from there? Because it can't be reviewed once that tackle's been taken.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you've got a chance your hand if you think there's a chance of a try. Maybe the Eels knew they hadn't forced the ball dead, that it was, if anything, it was going to be a touch off the Bulldogs, which meant that the ball was dead. But I mean, it looked to me like the Bulldogs had given up on the play.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
on it being like they expected it to be awarded. They were there in a huddle, and I think they were ready for the kick of goal.
What I really did like from that sequence was the fact that we did have the fall off strip, like we see a lot of other teams having done in recent seasons, where you have one player who's got a lock on the ball and has clearly made some sort of call, and we saw, I think it was Mitchell Moses and maybe Junior that were part of the tackle, not significant contributors, but they were there, and they clearly fell off, allowing Bryce to reef the ball out and find Moses with the offload. So we've talked about the importance of the one-on-one strip in seasons prior, and how the Eels don't really have anyone that has the same uncanny ability that we see from some of those Canberra guys, from Cameron Munster. And that's not to say that Bryce Cartwright is going to become a one-on-one savant in that regard, but the fact that they made that play is very positive. So nice to see that. Shame that it wasn't a try. But yeah, like you said, we did see that beautiful sequence between the forwards for the Bryce Cartwright double following that up. So we'll take that as a nice little consolation prize.
Yeah, and we're probably at the stage now where we go the 3-2-1 for this match.
Yeah, I think it's a nice little place to wrap up the NRL coverage. And yeah, geez, I'm just trying to think. I'm pretty confident with my three. I think that I'm going to go with a certain back row that we spoke about. I'm just trying to think how I'm going to ration out the 2-1, because there's a lot of good competitors in this list here. I mean, we didn't even talk about Quentin Gufferson 60s, and he was just a rock at the back again. Handled all that Burton threw at him with the high ball. So, yeah, I will go Bryce Cartwright for the 3 points. I'm still trying to think about my 2-1.
Well, look, I've got Bryce for the 3 points as well. I have to go for the King for 2. He was still being typical Clint Gutherson, just being everywhere, and that take that he made off the line dropout, which I think that was in that lead up to the Bryce Cartwright try, and that was so decisive. Just that, he produced that at the time I think that we needed it most, because the Bulldogs were threatening to get back line dropouts almost every single time they stepped up to get that boot in from between the posts. So, Gutho for 2 for mine. And look, it's hard to judge for the 1 point, but I think it has to be a forward. And I guess I'm trying to balance now the workloads of Junior and Reg. You know what? I think I'm going to opt for Reg. Junior had outstanding running meters. Reg wasn't quite up there at that same level, but geez, he just had a busy game. And each one of those carries, I thought, was asking questions of the Bulldogs and probably just adding a bruise or two as well. So I'm going to give Reg 1 point.
I will go 2 points for Junior because I think he typified the ideal of winning the collision, and the Dogs really could not handle what he was throwing at him. 1 point to the King. A very strong honourable mention to Morgan Harper, Reg as well. And I mean, there's a few other players. I thought Joe's second stint, Joe Fangahi, was quite good. I think that's a nice place to wrap up the NRL. Eels taking the 2 points, 26-8, which means provisionally right now, I believe they're in second place on the ladders. The Gold Coast Titans losing to the Dragons by 24 points means that they allowed the Dragons to leapfrog us. So we'll have to cry ourselves a river. Being only content with second or third place.
I hate to say it too, but we didn't get a moment. Well, certainly nothing that we can really go crazy about where we could say you cannot be serious.
Yes, I thought the officiating was fairly clinical. There was some questions about the Bryce Cartwright high tackle, but in general, I thought the flow of the game was pretty solid. So there's no real you cannot be serious moments, which brings us to a quick look at the reserve grade 60s. The curtain raiser here at CommBank Stadium. Eels going down in an absolutely high-scoring ping-pong sort of tit-for-tat game. Canterbury 38 over the Parramatta Eels 36. Samuel Luizio bagging not a Hattie, not a double Hattie, but a triple Hattie. He got a fifer. The Michelle Pfeiffer there with Ethan Sanders, Isaac Lumi also scoring. Ethan was 4 from 7 off the tee. The Dogs, unfortunately, pipping the Eels on the day. And, I mean, the conditions were sizzling here, 60s. It was brutal. And, unfortunately, the completion rate for the Eels reflects that. 20 or 30 sets for only 66% completion rate in the New South Wales Cup. They actually dominated Dogs in attacking stats. Twice the line breaks, plus 10 on the tackle busts, better average set distance, better runs, run meters, post-contact meters, better play the ball, more offloads. Like they're literally ahead in every stat, and even in terms of effective tackle rate, believe it or not, they're actually nearly 7 percentage points up on the Dogs. Yet a sequence of poor decisions and some bad defense led to, I think you could say, 3 tries, not quite against the run of play, but against the Eels' run of dominance in this game. That was the difference. You'd almost have to use the word gifted. I think when they do the coaches tape, where it's Monday or whatever for this team, they'll be looking back on a real missed opportunity here. But in saying that, while we do want to see wins on the board in the New South Wales Cup, as we often say in the junior reps as well, it's about development more than claiming a premiership in these grades. And I think suffice to say there, we did see some of the young talent stepping up here. And there's one player I'll let you sort of wax lyrical about shortly, who I think was probably the best on field on both sides. But we got to see Blaze Talangi make some mistakes. He looked like a young man that was learning a difficult new role at times. But in saying that, there was also some passages of play where he was untouchable. He put on 2 try assists where he was able to break tackles and offload the support. I thought coming off the bench, young Charlie Geimer brought some good energy, had a couple of really big tackles. And, the one that really stood out was Matty Arthur, and I'll let you introduce what exactly he did in this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to find the words to describe that first half because he just totally dominated, didn't he? It was, I think he was credited with 2 try assists, but he took a stranglehold on that first, what do they play, 40 minutes per half now in the New South Wales Cup? It's not 35, it's 40, isn't it?
Yeah, Cup's 40.
He took a stranglehold of the game in that first half, and it was just the full gamut of skills. His service out of dummy half for a start is immaculate, but then he was also exploring what was available to him in his running game around the ruck and was making significant inroads. The try, and like full marks in the end for Ethan Sanders actually being able to ground it because the bounce ended up horrible, but Woodsy breaking downfield and then chipping over the top, and Ethan Sanders getting the try from that, and then he was also
the array of
he got
short
that.
balls on the goal line is like seriously impressive for him. He has a great mix-up game there, and he feeds his forwards with a chance to attack the line. And on top of that, he always we talked about in the review of the Canberra Raiders trial about Ethan's struggles with the speed of the game at the senior level, and that wasn't apparent today. And I think large in part to the fact that Woods was out there feeding him, because the way they work together and the way they align themselves and the way Arthur always hits Sanders in stride, playing quite aggressively and flat, it's almost a bit unique the way you see halves and hookers interact. So I thought they both had good games on the back of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair call because today was certainly a step up in the standard of performance from Ethan Sanders. And I mean, players enjoy certain combinations that they're able to establish. And you can go back over the years, like Cliffy Lyons and Steve Menzies, for example. They complemented each other. And in this instance, you've got a couple of young players that have come through the ranks and had success at SG ball level in that combination, took that combination through to Jersey Flegg, almost got to the big dance in the Jersey Flegg. But now I think you're going to start to see the best from Ethan Sanders, because I think you're going to start to see some real quality from Matt Arthur. So, and that, what about that? The way he threaded that kick, that little kick through the legs of the defenders
for the hat trick. I think it might have been Samuel's Hattie. It was.
Yeah, I think it could have been for Samuel's hat trick. Yes.
Yeah, it was a very, very impressive piece of footwork there from young Woods. Look, the Eels looked a bit vulnerable on the flanks in this one. 60s, I think our lack of backline depth got a bit exposed there by a speedy Bulldogs backline. In the forwards, I thought Matt Dury was very good. He was breaking the line at will at times, and he ended up with 3 line breaks and a try assist. He was very, very strong. Ogden and Makatoa were quite serviceable. Ditto for Luca Moretti. But, yeah, just I think those errors or giveaways, as you're sort of like talking about it being probably a better way of phrasing it, coming back to haunt the Eels in this one. So they didn't get the bickies on the ladder, but some really positive signs from the young kids, which is the primary driving focus of this grade, but some work to do for the team. So we'll have to wait and see if they can sort out that back line. I'm not sure what sort of options are around right now, given we've had some really bad luck with young guys in Mel Stephen and Richard Penasini being ruled out for the season. But maybe they can make something happen there, because this team, if Talangi and Sanders and Arthur in particular, but alongside guys like Parker and Geimer too, continue to grow, there's a potential to make this a really fun ride through the season of 2024.
Yeah, absolutely true. Now, unfortunately, we've got another loss to report with the Jersey Flegg. today.
Yeah, we weren't out here for this one. It was the third game in a triple header out at Eric Tweedow, but the timing on it made it very tight to get back out to CommBank for the New South Wales Cup. And yeah, in this one, the Eels, who we sort of fashioned to be a pretty handy team coming into this round, with a good forward pack and some returning pieces in the spine. Not good enough on the day for the Bulldogs, who we did, I think, preface by saying that they've been pretty good in this grade for the last few years, so it's not a surprise they got a strong squad there, but they were much better on the day, 30-6. Rawi Smith, the lone scorer for the Eels, with Arpa Tweedle making the conversion. And yeah, the Dogs 6 tries to 1. They missed half their conversion, so a bit of a buffer there for the Eels, thankfully. We'll have to wait and see if we can get any feedback between now and the news podcast 60s. But yeah, obviously a suboptimal way to start the season for the Eels and the Flag. But we've seen strong starts that has petered out before, and likewise we've seen first up losses that can still be turned around very quickly. It's just a matter of how much they can take out of this loss and adapt it moving forwards.
Yeah, and speaking about losses, the SG Ball has now made it 3 losses in a row.
It was quite literally the mixed bag for the junior reps this week. 2 wins, 2 losses, unfortunately for the SG Ball. Actually a spirited loss, which I know doesn't count for much on the ladder, but they're taking on one of the heavyweights in the competition in the third place Newcastle Knights, coming off the back of 2 pretty poor efforts in their own off themselves 60s after losses to Cronulla and then the Bulldogs. But yeah, falling 4 points short of the Knights here. Devonta Vivella bagging a double. Javan Stevenson-Hala also going over. Dom Ferrugia 2 from 3 off the tee. So the Knights scoring 4 tries to 3 over the Eels. Again, weren't able to see this one because it was out at Newcastle at St John's Oval. It's a moral victory, I suppose, 60s, after a couple of weeks of really ordinary play for our boys in the ball. But again, it leaves them drifting down the ladder. If I just look at the provisional ladder now, which I'm not sure if it's updated right now, it's still at the Eels in 8th place here in what we presume is a top 8 given the 16 teams in the ball this year. But yeah, so 3 and 3 they have updated ladder here. So they're not out of touch with the finals by any means right now, but they do need to bank a win. And moral victories and losses don't count for anything on the ladder, but maybe it means that they can turn it around next week. So it was good to see him be in touch with the Knights, who are now top 2 on the ladder and have only lost 1 game, so they're obviously a formidable opponent this week. But it's going to sting that they couldn't get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was a grade that got the job done. They're continuing on their winning ways, and that's because the Harold Matthews Cup team is remaining undefeated. Yeah,
missing one of their best players this week at fullback in Cyrus Bloomfield after he copped the 1-game suspension for dissent. They managed to slot the centre Nathan Howard at the custodial role and bring in Josiah Tua'au into the centres, and ended up taking the Chocolates 28-21. I think the Central Coast Roosters came into this game in 7th place, so they were a pretty handy team. Eels going out to Woy Woy Oval on the road, a bit of a road trip there for them, getting the job done 5 tries to 4. Anders Johansson right at Talangi, Anders Johansson again, so got the double. Wesley Picotti off the interchange, and Samuel Mardini, who made his season debut for the Eels, all scoring. Lincoln Fletcher 3 from 5 off the tee, also tacking on a penalty goal. And the Roosters, interestingly enough, 60s, bagging a field goal on half time to make it 20 points to 1. Probably one of the more unique
22 to 1.
22 to 1.
22 to 1.
One of the more unique scorelines you'll ever see. And obviously they had a bit of a rally in the second half there with the Eels getting the try to Samuel Mardini to help shore up their lead. And yeah, it's a big win because I believe they still remain undefeated in the season, obviously, given that they drew last week against the Dogs. But just looking at results here, yeah, it keeps them abreast of the Canterbury and just the half win behind the Magpies on top of the ladder. So doing everything in their power to make that push into the top 2, which, again, we're not sure if it's a top 8 in this competition. There are 17 teams, so you'd think it'd be a top 8. But, getting that top 2 and your sort of best bite at the cherry there in the finals will be important, and they're doing that right now.
Yeah, and the girls' representative games we were able to cover. That was out at Eric Tweedale Stadium at Granville. The results split there. A loss to the Tasha Gale team going down 26-10 to the powerful Roosters Indigenous Academy team. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And the Lisa Fiola Cup side, they really went to town in this one. I was expecting a tight game.
Yeah, so was I. Looking at the Roosters' position on the ladder and knowing their pedigree in the competition, I was expecting a really hard-fought game to be played out. But I also got to say, Sixties, I mean, our scoreline of 50-4 was impressive until I saw another result in the Lisa Fiola this weekend, with the Bulldogs absolutely handling the Seagulls 94-0 in a 60-minute game, where they missed four conversions. So, I mean, the Bulldogs, they've got a good grip on the way to build these female pathway teams, because they've been sensational on both grades, and that is one of the most one-sided results I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, the Eels did lose that first round game to the Bulldogs, but have since gone on a winning streak since then. And this 50-4 victory over the Roosters, it emphasises that they have another gear that they can go to. They're not going to be defined by that first round loss to the Bulldogs. In fact, I think it would be interesting to see a matchup occur in the next couple of weeks. That can't happen because of the nature of the draws and the fact that you've got teams that don't even face someone once, let alone teams looking for a return match. But so convincing win to the Eels, 50 points to 4. They continue their march up the ladder in the Lisa Fiola Cup. Now, the Tasha Gale, I really don't know what to say, because we know how strong this Roosters team is, the Indigenous Roosters Academy, and the Eels were going with them. They were actually matching them in this Tasha Gale clash, and then the errors, mate. The errors just kicked in.
That's really what's defined their season, hasn't it, 60s? Obviously, last week they had the good win against the Dragons, but they've let some serious opportunities to be on top of good teams and bank some really tough wins across the first 3 or 4 weeks of this competition let slip because of repeat errors off kickoffs, really frustrating stuff that should be within their ability to handle, but they just let them creep into each and every game, and it's really cost them.
Oh, absolutely. So they went down 26 points to 10. The Eels' 10 points were the last 10 points of the game, so it was 26-0. And then the Eels did pull back a couple there, and they were really good tries that they were able to register against such a strong Roosters team. But yeah, I think the Roosters were there for the taking today. And it wasn't so much that they didn't play well, although they did find some errors. It was more that when the Eels held the ball, the meters that they were making through the middle of the field was astronomical. The problem was, again, being able to build up defensive pressure, and they let the pressure valve get released far too many times. It was look, it must be frustrating for the coaching staff, because they know that they've got some talent there, but until they can complete sets and get around that 75% or higher, then it's going to be a struggle. Now, I'm saying this without being able to look at any stats whatsoever. There was just undeniable that there were errors left, right and centre in this game. So be interesting to see what the completion rate was. I can't imagine that it would be anything too high. But, mate, that apart from, there was actually an 8th game today, 40, would you believe it? There was, I believe, a 16s development squad game over at Narrabeen. So Eels staff absolutely everywhere trying to cover the games today. We did our best with covering the girls' representative games and then getting out to watch New South Wales Cup and the NRL, and then do the post game at Para Leagues. But mate, I think that just about brings us to the end of the podcast.
Yeah, sorry, I had the old drift off after.
I've obviously just been rambling.
No, I just got a message about the footy that I was just quickly responding to, which had me a little bit distracted. But yes, it truly was the billing of a super sad day for the Parramatta Eels, and we had obviously a mixed bag of results going up and down the grades. But the most important game, obviously the NRL, the Eels prevailing with that solid win over the Bulldogs, really positioning themselves nicely for that tilt at the reigning back-to-back champions in the Penrith Panthers next week. That is going to be a fiery affair. I think the Eels and Panthers have played barnstormer after barnstormer across the last few seasons. Their round 4 game last year was arguably the best game of the season, going into Golden Point on the back of that Cleary 2-point field goal. Eels hitting back with a Mitchell Moses field goal of their own. So really looking forward to that one. 60s. BA is going to have to figure out that bench. It's going to be a tough one. Someone's going to miss out, but really keen, really happy to have the Eels bank that win and just have football back, mate, proper. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it is. And it's, mate, let's hope that this first round victory is a signal for what we can look forward to for the rest of the season. If nothing else, it's that I think there was a maturity about the Eels' performance today overall that is probably my main takeaway from today.
Yeah,
so
Mitchell Moses not a factor for most of this game due to that little groin niggle. Dylan had to step up, and while I think he still has to work on that long kicking game, the fact that the team were able to step into the void of Mitchell Moses not being able to lead the team does bode very well for us. So good to see.
Absolutely.
Got the job done against a team that we knew were going to be fired up and love to niggle us, and they end up being more physically dominant, which is exactly how his team is built to play. So well done to the Eels, bank that win. Cup, unfortunately, didn't get the bickies, but we saw some incredible play from the young players, which is, it's not even a silver lining 60s. It is the driving force for the New South Wales Cup. So love to see that. As always, when we wrap up, a quick shout out to the sponsors: Big Swing Golf, North Mead, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, and Parramatta. Also a massive thank you to Parramatta Leagues Club, home of the Parramatta Eels. Put us on for our first live show of the season at Sturlows. So if you're able to tune in there, thank you. Otherwise, we'll catch you on the next episode. And 60s, as always, I'll leave you to finish off the podcast.
Yes. So, first of all, thank you to Steve Ella for being such a wonderful guest. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.